All right, so after we identified those stakeholders and we collected requirements for them and we put them in a traceability matrix, and we defined scope, we broke it down into work packages, and then we broke those down into activities. Now we want to put those in an organized way so that we can actually see it. Picture gives you 1,000 words. So the network schedule diagram is what we're going to create here, and it graphically shows the order that all the activities are going to take place. We'll use this one later on to actually create the schedule. All right, so right now we're not doing any estimations. We're not we're not figuring out what resources are going to actually do these activities. We're just putting them in order. That's all we're doing. All right, so we'll see the inputs. We'll take plans, see some documents. We'll talk about these later on. We'll do precedence diagramming method. We'll look at leads and lags. We'll look at the dependencies. These are things you'll need to memorize. And then the outputs, we're going to get a schedule network diagram. That's the goal of this, right? Is to get that picture, that diagram of exactly what all of the activities look like. And it will look something like this. Most folks use Gantt charts. How many of you use network schedule diagrams? Any of you using this? Yeah, it's not a common thing. So what we'll do is we'll figure out what the relationships are, the finish to start, start to finish, etc. Then we'll figure out the dependencies, and we'll put them all together, and we'll get something like this. All right, so you can use software to do this. We'll take our list of activities that we came up with in the last process, along with their attributes. The attributes are going to tell us, what the dependencies are, the leads and lags, etc. Any assumptions we have and which ones are milestones, so that's going to help us. So we'll take all that information as inputs. We'll also take the schedule management plan because it'll talk about our development approach and how we're actually going to build this thing out. And it'll also tell us how detailed our schedule needs to be. Scope management plan as well. So we'll use that over those EEFs and OPAs as well. Then we'll do precedence diagramming method, PDM, right? Precedence diagramming method. And precedence diagramming method uses activity on node. So I'm going to draw on the screen here. Where's mine? Here it goes. And because here we have here. So this is activity on node. I'm going to show you activity on arrow because the exam references it, and I want you to know what they're talking about. All right, so right now, I'm going to go back here. I need some white space. So this is what project management looked like in the 40s. And you'd have one activity here, and it would look something like this. And then you would have these arrows. Right? You might have an arrow here. All right. And then you would have, the duration in there. That might be a 9, that might be a 1, a 2, a 4, so on and so forth, right? And then activity A, activity B, activity C, activity D, activity E, and F. Right? And so in this case, the activity is on the arrow. You see here that the activity is on the arrow. It only allows for a finish to start relationship. Regardless of where you're at in the circle, you're starting, and regardless of where you're at, you're finishing the activity. It only allows you for one relationship, and that is a finish to start relationship. That's no longer used, but I want you to see what it's like so that when it's referenced on the exam, you know, no, that's not what we're talking about. So we don't do what they call AOA or activity on arrow. That's no longer used, right? What we do use, all right, so let me clear this. I'll have to end it and then start it back up. Okay, what we do use is activity on node, and that's what we see here. We see the boxes there, and the activity is actually on the node. Let me go back and draw another example of it, where we have our nodes, and then from here, right, you have the activity is literally on the node and not on the arrow. All right, and the reason for that, it's kind of what that looks like, is we have multiple relationships. Finish to start, start to start, finish to finish, start to finish. You're gonna need to memorize. You're gonna need to memorize these dependencies, these relationships. Note that the finish to start, that's the most popular, the most frequent. Whereas your start to finish, this is the least popular. So finish to start, this is sort of like activity A must finish in order for activity B to start. And you want to think of those words. You want to literally use that, what do they call that? Is that a prepositional phrase, I guess? That in order to, something must in order to. So activity A must, and then either finish or start in order for activity B to, and either finish or start. And so we got activity A must finish in order for activity B to start. That's your finish to start. All right, finish to finish. This would be like if you finish to finish activity, you install a light bulb, but you're not done until you actually turn it on and verify that the switch comes on. Right, so you're finished to finish. Right, you have someone who's installing the fixture, and then you have the electrician that's doing the cabling. All right, one's not finished until the other's finished in that deal. Right, you have start to start. This is like as soon as the author of a book begins writing a chapter, an editor can begin editing. Right, he doesn't have to finish the entire book. That's your start to start. And then your start to finish, activity B must start in order for activity A to finish, like that deal. That's sort of like, let's say you're a cop, working on a beat, or military on a post, or even a nurse in the ER, right? You don't get to leave until somebody else starts their shift. All right, so somebody else has to start in order for you to finish, right? And they sign up for that, they know that. So those are your four relationships: finish to start, most common; start to finish, least common. Then you have the four dependencies. All right, the four dependencies: mandatory, discretionary, internal, and external. And so you have mandatory dependencies. This is it's required legally, contractually, or by nature of work, like physically. The idea that you can't frame a house until you've poured the foundation. You can't put a roof on unless you framed it, right? You can't install an application unless you have an OS like type deal, right? It's all the same. It's a mandatory dependency. All right. Then you have discretionary dependency. It's your decision. It's your order. However you want to do it. The best way I describe this one is some of you put your pants on, and then you put your socks on and you put your shoes on. Some of you put your socks on, then you put your pants on, and then you put your shoes on. Right? And if you're my grandfather, he's the guy that he puts his socks on, his shoes on, and then he puts his pants on over his shoes, because he's like, his clothes have to be like so perfect. He's still like one of those, and does this and look in the mirror. But like, right, that's his discretion. And that's the idea on the exam that you'll see, right? So it's just whatever order you want. Then you have external dependencies. These are dependencies that have nothing to do with your project, but you gotta, it's external and you are dependent upon it. And PMI will do their best job to make these sound like they're mandatory. And the best example of this, an external dependency, if I'm Pfizer, the FDA is an external dependency to me. It is not mandatory. It is not mandatory for me to seek FDA approval in order for me to run a project where I can have clinical trials and studies and determine that this drug either A is effective and then B is safe for human consumption. I don't need FDA approval. I only need it. It is only dependency if I'm operating in the US. But if I sell my drugs anywhere else, it's not, right? So that's an external dependency. So highlight that one and keep that one in mind, because that's another one that the exam likes to trick you on. They'll present some dependency, and it's usually around regulation, EPA, FDA, some government regulation, and they'll even use the word mandatory within the question. So when you see that, you're reading the 8-9 lines of text and there's a word in there, and then it appears in the A, B, C, or D in the questions, be very skeptical of that, because that's usually a trick for PMI. They're not going to give you any help right? They're not gonna give you a clue to exactly what the answer is within the question. So that's another key to know that, you know, it's not mandatory, right? They'll actually use that word within the sentence. So those are the external dependencies. And then internals just depends on what you and the team want to do. It's kind of like, when should we meet? All right, when should we check in? When should QA and QC take place? All right, so each dependency can be described by using two of the attributes: mandatory or discretionary, and external or internal. All right, so you have multiple, you know, discretionary types, or if you will, multiple dependency types, excuse me. Okay. By the way, when we defined activities in the process before, that's when we determined what the dependencies are, you know, which activity needed to start before that activity could take place, what activities would happen after that activity would take place. So the activity attributes, that's an output of defined activities, the process before. That is where we got all this information. So just, you know, want to tie that back. Right, so here's leads and lags. Leads and lags, and both leads and lags refer to the successor activity. Right, that's the key thing here. Leads and lags refer to the successor activity. So lead being that I want to start some activity sooner than I otherwise would. Right, think lead, I'm in a race, I have a head start. Right, I'm going to finish sooner. Right, so if I employ a lead, so, and not lead time, that is another term for PMI, right? Lead time as we know it, like shipping or ETA for delivery, but just lead. Right, so be careful with that on the exam too. Reading comprehension exam. All right, you get to question 179 and your eyes are watering, you're tired, right? And you just missed that word, you know, that time was there. So just lead refers to that. And then lag says that we want to slow an activity down. And by the way, when we employ lag, that's our choice. If something happened and then we have to start an activity later than we wanted to, that's a delay. But if we decide that we're going to start an activity later than you know we originally had scheduled, that's lag. So, you know, keep that in mind too, because on the exam, sometimes they don't just give you the definition, they describe it and then ask you to pick it out. Right? So if we're purposely delaying an activity, we're employing a lag, but if something is happening, then that's just a delay. Now, here's the deal. What relationship do we see right here between the punch list and the building lot?
Finish to start.
Yeah, finish to start. Okay. And so, but we see here that normally, you know, this activity might have been over here, but we pulled it back there, right? Okay. So then what relationship do we see here?
Start.
Oh, they tell you. Sorry. I'm looking at it, gives you right there. And actually, here's what I want to do. Because I want to show you, I'm going to draw it up here. I want to show you how you can have a finish to start for both relationships, and actually you could do this, right? And you could have your here, right? And that's still finish to start. And then you could have here, and that's still finish to start. So you can employ leads and lags using a finish or start. So I just want you to know that the relationship, just because it's different here, the relationship will have no bearing on whether you choose to use a lead or a lag. You can use it with finish to finish, start to start, start to finish, finish to finish. Okay. All right, so tools and techniques, additional tools and techniques. Of course, you can use software to do all this. You know, you have to put in if it's a, you know, what the dependencies are as a relationship, but you can use a project or P6 to do all this for you, and it'll visually do all this stuff.